and welcome back to part 9 of this Rune Level 1 run. Um, I think from this point on, mostly what I'll be just going through is a bunch of boss rushes, so just going from boss to boss, as pretty much all of the locations are now open, all of the bosses are now open. It's kind of just pick and choose which ones you want to fight next. I kind of like space them out so that I take like a few, like, I guess, clean up minor bosses, and then go into a Remembrance boss, and then kind of fill that inner space, just so that you can like space out the big, important, dramatic fights. Just space them out a bit. But I think our first goal is just to do a little bit of cleanup with some other easier bosses. And now for a little bit of cleanup, we have the Ancestor spirits. We have this one, and then we have the one that drops the actual remembrance. And now we have the Regal Ancestor Spirit. I'm only going to be showing the Regal version of this fight, as the standard Ancestor Spirit is nearly identical to this fight. The normal Ancestor Spirit is basically just the phase 1 of this boss fight without like teleports and heals. So anything that works on the Regal Ancestor Spirit should work on the normal Ancestor Spirit. Now, when figuring out how to take on bosses, I generally like to look at their resistances first, as debuffs are generally a very effective strategy on how to beat bosses, just because they do percentage-based damage. The Regal Ancestor Spirit has very high resistances to both Bleed and Frost, having a 1,200 point requirement to proc either status effect, and a 1,600 point resistance to be able to proc a second or third status effects afterwards. The claws that we have deal 45 points of bleed and 66 points of frost every time they hit. This would take 25 hits to proc the first effect, and 35 hits to proc the second effect. Now, claws do strike twice every time you attack, which is generally why I go for them, is because that almost, in effect, halves the amount of strikes that you need, but it still is a lot of attacks, and would probably be better trying to look into maybe a different strategy. And you could also look to using bleed and frost pots. However, the pots are quite hard to hit, as the boss is very fast, and sometimes can just dodge out of the way, and you only have a limited number of them, so it's probably not a very good idea to try to use pots to build up bleed or frost. Now, for the other resistances, this boss is actually weak to both fire and holy damage, taking an additional 20% damage from either source. So, from this, fire pots will do a very large amount of damage to this boss. And you can also increase that by using oil pots in combination. So oil pots will increase the damage of a fire-based attack by 50%. So it'll multiply it by 1.5, only on the first hit. So every time you hit it with a fire pot, you'll need to reapply oil. Now, I also use a bit of lightning pots as well. However, this is just because farming the resources to use the fire pots are kind of annoying. Smoldering butterflies are a little bit annoying to farm. There is a good way you can farm them in Limgrave, but it's kind of just a pain to do that every single time you want to fight it. So I just use lightning pots as almost a substitution, as it does decent damage. But I would recommend just going with all fire if you can. Now, even though fire pots do work very well against this boss, as they are able to do a good chunk of damage, this boss will heal after it hits certain HP thresholds. And so you can't actually deal the entire HP of the boss with just pots. In this case, you still do need to rely a little bit on bleed and frost to be able to get through it, which is why I still have the claws on me, and why I still use things like the kukri to build up bleed. The biggest use of the pots is mostly just to speed through those heals to get it down to its final phase as quick as possible, so the fight doesn't just take forever. Now, these heals will occur at certain HP thresholds. The first one will occur at 50% HP, and the boss will heal 50% of its HP back, so it'll go back up to maximum. After this, it'll go into its second phase, where it'll gain a Spring Hair Hop and a Boar Charge moveset. The Spring Hair Hop is pretty easy to dodge, it's very slow, and its turning radius is very large, so all you need to do is just get behind it and it can't hit you. And the boar charge is also quite simple to dodge, as it's a single attack and it's just charging straight at you, so just run into it and dodge through it. The boss will then attempt to heal again after dropping below 40% HP, but this time it'll only heal 30% of its HP, going back up to 70% of its HP. After healing this, it'll go into its third phase, where it'll gain the goat roll attack. This is probably the hardest attack I found in this boss fight, as its hitbox is very weird. The most effective way I found to dodge this attack is to just run at the boss and run to its side and try to just dodge off to the side and follow behind its path. You're still going to need to dodge through it sometimes because it is faster than the player, but this will limit the amount of times that you might actually need to dodge it. I've also found that you almost need to dodge at the very last second, as the boss actually still does have a collision box at this time, and will almost drag you along and keep you inside the hitbox. So dodging at the last second will maximize your chance of not getting hit if it decides to drag you along with it. Now, the boss still does have more healing after this. It can heal again infinitely after it drops below 10% HP. Every single time it does this, it will only heal 15% of its HP. However, it can do this infinitely. There's no restriction on how many times it can heal this 15%. It's recommended to keep 1 or 2 fire pots until this point, just so that you can burst through that last little bit of HP, just so that you don't have to sit in this fight and have the boss infinitely heal. You need some way to burst through that 10%. As you can see, I didn't do that in this fight. I used all of my pots right in the beginning, something that I probably should change for any time I want to fight this boss again. However, it is possible to not have fire pots to burst through it and just rely entirely on Frost and Bleed, as they do about 10% of the max HP of the boss. So you can, if you get a lucky one that procs about when the boss is at like 9% HP, you can kill it, which is what happens in this fight. Now, you can also see that I have a very liberal use of a lot of consumables in this fight, and also many others. It kind of is just like with Soul Level 1 without any weapon upgrades, you find that consumables are actually quite a good source of damage. They are able to do just about as much damage as your weapons do at range. The only reason you really don't see them being used at standard soul levels is because they can't be upgraded, so their damage falls off once you get anywhere into like mid-game. So after the first boss or two, consumables are completely useless because your weapon will just do more damage. But when you're in a soul level 1, you don't have that luxury. Your weapons deal the same damage throughout the entire game as they did in the very first boss, and so consumables will do just as much. It's also nice because this boss is very mobile, so a lot of times you can just keep up damage, keep up bleed increases and stuff like that at range when you can't actually get into melee range, and it just makes the boss fight go through faster. As this fight is very long, and any way to reduce it is good. Now, overall, I do enjoy this boss. It is a really cool boss. The goat roll attack is kind of annoying and a little bit bullshit, but it still is a mostly enjoyable boss fight. The atmosphere that it gives, the music that's played behind, just gives a really good, like a really cool feeling and atmosphere around fighting this boss, and it really does build, like, work alongside the visuals that you see when fighting the boss. The boss fight's a little bit, I would say, slower than most other bosses, so you'll find a lot of bosses are really, like, up close, melee range, constantly dodging and attacking, whereas this boss, there's quite a lot of time where you're either just running or you're kind of just standing there waiting for the boss to do something. It's a little bit more of a calming experience than other bosses, and it can be kind of enjoyable. It's not the best, but it works. And besides, it's just a side boss, even though it does give a remembrance. Oh, shit. Nice, Frost. I was able to kill him before he decided to heal again. Would have been like 5 times that he decided to heal. Yeah, the boss is not hard in any regard. Its attacks are pretty easy to dodge, except maybe that like ram roll. But it's definitely just healing. You've kind of just got to out damage him. I found that like using status effect pots like the freezing pots and the bleed pots didn't really do much because it took like 5 pots each to just stack any sort of status effect, and then the bleed pots just never hit. So you'd stack it maybe once in all 20 that you had. But that's another remembrance done. Alright, up next is Mohg. Or Mohg. I don't know. Pronouncing his name is weird. But I've always enjoyed this boss fight. It's been pretty good, although I know this is probably one of the endgame bosses. Him, Melania, and like Elden Beast and Radagon are basically like the final ends of certain lines of bosses, so he's probably going to be one of the hardest. Be interesting to see how this goes.
Dearest Mikola, you must abide alone a while. Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
Alright, it's Moggin time. Great start. Great start. That is all kinds of bad. Watch cutscene for like a minute and last about 5 seconds in the fight. At least this has got to be one of the best boss runbacks because there isn't one. I'm so happy when they do this for bosses because just running back to bosses is annoying. It's a problem that I am very glad they fixed from previous Souls games because, man, some of those runbacks were bad. But this may take a few attempts here and there. Probably just go get a little bit of practice with a like standard leveled account and then come back and fight him again. But I don't think it'll be too bad. Now we have Mohg, Lord of Blood. This boss was much more of a challenge than I was expecting. His attacks weren't very hard to dodge. However, it's the fact that a single mistake can lead to my death. Like, you get touched once and you're dead. I guess this is something that I generally expect from these later fights, is that they generally lead into no-hit fights because a single hit can insta-kill you. Now, in terms of strategy and taking him on, Mohg is very weak to bleed. Like, very weak to bleed. Even though he is the god of blood, he has one of the lowest bleed resistances in the game out of any boss. Um, he only takes 290 points of bleed to proc the effect, and so with the Frost Claws that I'm using, it only takes 7 hits to proc a bleed. It honestly felt like more than that when I was actually fighting him, but it still is a very low bleed resistance. Now, even with the fact that he was bleeding very often in this fight, it still did kind of feel like the fight took a really long time. Maybe that was because this was a very scuffed run, but I think it was more just the fact that he zones you a lot of time with the Bloodfire on the ground, especially the one where he just drops it right down on top of him. That one basically prevents you from attacking him at all. I could have, for another strategy, instead of using the Frost Claws, could have just used double bleed infused curve swords, and as they do ridiculous amounts of bleed buildup, each one will hit for like 60 bleed every time they hit, and you can infuse that with like seppuku and deal almost 100 per hit. And then since it's a curved sword and you're using 2 of them and double wielding, every time you do a jump attack, it hits 4 times, dealing 400 bleed buildup every single time you jump heavy. Meaning every time you jump heavy, you're gonna bleed him. That's the strategy used for this boss to speed run through him. You can beat him in a matter of seconds if you use the strategy. However, that's not as fun as just learning his moveset, honestly. So I decided against just kind of choosing the boss fight with just massive amounts of bleed. If it's not a challenge, it's not a soul level 1. This is mostly about just having fun, so. Now, with this fight, honestly, the most challenging part of it is the Bloodfire that he splatters on the ground everywhere. Like, the only thing at this point preventing him from not just like instantly killing you with any of his attacks is your shield talisman, but that only works if you're at maximum HP. And so if you step in the Bloodfire, it'll just tick you down like one hit point or so, but that removes your one-shot protection. So every time you step in the Bloodfire, you need to heal, or else you'll just die on the next hit. And honestly, that's probably what made this take so many attempts, is I would step in the Bloodfire once, and then I would just get hit by the next attack. Now, you can just, step in the Bloodfire, not dodge all of his attacks, and then heal, but I don't know if that's just, you get hit, and then, you're mentally thinking, oh shit, now I'm actually able to die instantly, and it kind of just screws with your mind or something like that, and so it's more likely that you're going to take a hit after that, but I just felt like as soon as I got hit once, I would get hit again and just die. The hardest part of this fight is definitely just managing the Bloodfire on the ground, making sure you don't step in it and tick down your HP. But I do feel like this actually adds a good layer of depth to the fight. It gives you something extra to manage, where you can keep pressure but keep building up the Bloodfire on the ground, or you can kind of like try to step out of combat and try to let the Bloodfire kind of like fizzle out, so you can get a little bit more of a open arena to fight him in. Also, another challenge that I encountered was the graves that are on the side of the arena. A lot of times I would find that he would push me into the sides of the arena, and I would get caught on the graves, which would like block my vision or block my movement, and push me into an attack that would inevitably get me killed. So the goal is just to keep him in the center of the arena, so as long as you can manage to keep him there, the fight shouldn't be too bad. Now, with all of Mohg's attacks, it's generally advised to stay next to him. It's much easier to dodge all of his attacks if you're right up next to him, as well as all of the Bloodfire that he spreads out is pretty much away from him. It's not right up next to him. So if you're just right up next to him, it's not going to be too problematic to try to dodge all the Bloodfire on the ground. However, sometimes it is good to try to run away and create some space, as he doesn't have as much space closing attacks, and he'll kind of just walk towards you, which will allow you to almost wait out all the Bloodfire on the ground and kind of reset the arena. Sometimes it's good to be a little bit passive, but most of the time aggression is advised. Now, with all of his attacks, there is one attack that is probably better to run away though, which is the flying attack that he has, where he sprays blood on the ground and then charges down at you. With that one, dodging into him just kind of means you're going to be dodging into the Bloodfire he sprays, as well as making it harder to dodge his next attack, and it puts you far away from him, so you kind of need to run up to him. Where if you run away and then you dodge to your right, like back right, you'll actually land right next to him. It's not after that. There's not enough time to punish him and attack him, as he'll do an attack immediately after. However, it does allow you to dodge his next attack much easier and punish it. Now, there are a few attacks that he has where you don't even need to dodge. There's ones where you can just position yourself and like walk around him and just dodge it by standing in the right spot. There are three of them, which is the Claw Explosion, when he draws back his hand and shoves it forward in Phase 1, and then the Jump Overhead and a Spear Stab in Phase 2. If you just basically walk around to his right and to his back, none of these will hit you. This will allow for more attacks, as you don't need to wait for the dodge recovery, or it allows you to heal easier, but it just gives you more opportunity to attack, and also allows you to recover stamina instead of using it on dodges. The Claw Explosion grows in Phase 2, so it only works in Phase 1. The same strat still works for it. You can still walk around to his right and roll to his back, but you do need to roll because the explosion will hit his entire AoE. The Spear Stab, however, only works in Phase 2, as it actually gains slight delay between its charge up, so you can actually get behind him before it'll go out, whereas in Phase 1 he throws it out too quickly and you can't actually just dodge it by walking around. Now, as I've said before, this fight took much longer than it should have. Like, I came within a single hit on like my 6th attempt of this boss fight. And there was a few others where I came within like 1 or 2 hits from killing him. But every single time, I would just somehow manage to screw it up, get hit by the Bloodfire, or just get double tapped by some attack. This took quite a few extra attempts, and it isn't the longest attempt out of any boss, but it's close. Mainly, this is just a problem because, like, again, a single attack can lead to your death. A single mistake can just kill you, as with all of these bosses. This run that actually gave me the victory has got to be the most scuffed out of all of my runs. I took so many hits. I ended up with like 3 Estus left, and all of my attempts beforehand that were all failures, I managed to get through most of them without healing at all. Like, they were nearly no-hit runs, but I would just, as soon as I got hit, I would get hit again. So it wasn't a problem of healing and running out of that, it was more a problem of just making a mistake in the first place. Now, with all of that, this is still a very good fight. This has got to be one of my favorites in this game, just because it has such a good rhythm where it feels like you're able to dodge all of his attacks and then immediately counter him, and then he immediately goes into another attack. So there's like no downtime in between any of his actions. It really does feel like you're putting on a ton of pressure on this boss, constantly attacking him, and he is doing the same thing to you. So, I really love bosses that just are able to get that like dance between the player and the boss correctly, and this is one of them. Also, Mohg's theme is probably one of the best in the game. One of the other ones I can think of is Godrick's. Godrick's theme's also really good, but Mohg's theme is just so good. Like, it's just so good to listen to. That is the literal most scuffed run that I have ever had for any boss ever. Like, every single time attempt that I had before this attempt, I was getting around like no hits, like the entire way through, and then it would just become like a point where I would get hit once, and then I would just immediately get hit afterwards and die. I would normally end out like runs with still like 13 healing left, and then I would just die. And then this one, I had somehow get hit a lot of times, but none of them are ever able to kill me, and I'm able to actually beat him. I feel like with the amount of attempts that I've had that have come so close to being no-hit runs, I feel like I could just go for a no-hit run at this point, and it wouldn't take too many more attempts, although that took way many more attempts than I had actually anticipated. I got him down to like a single hit once on my like, what, 6th attempt or something like that, and then it was just downhill from there. Oh my god. Alright, well that's Mohg down. Alright, with Mohg out of the way, I think the next goal will probably be actually aiming for taking out the dragon trio, so Lansseax, then Fortissax, and then Placidusax. That's probably my next goal, is just knocking out those three back to back. Why not keep the similar dragon fights close to each other? Alright, first on the list of the dragon trio is Lansseax. Lansseax is... You can find her either down by the graves at the bottom of the Atlas Plateau, or you can find her here. The only way you can actually kill her is if you fight her here. Now, she's a very big dragon, so I don't think claws will be able to hit her effectively. So I'm using the double swords. She is resistant, but vulnerable to both status effects of frost and bleed. So you're using those swords. Ah, there he is. I'm trying to figure out exactly where to activate her. I could not see anything out of that. It's been a while since I fought this boss, and completely forgot the moveset. Lansseax. Big Dragon Mommy. This fight was quite a bit more annoying than it should have been. Like, the boss itself isn't really that annoying. Like, I actually quite enjoy Lansseax's moveset. However, you fight her on a cliff. It's just the arena you fight her in is just absolutely terrible. Like, I don't know what it is with FromSoft's obsession with putting dragons on cliffs, but because this isn't even the first one, you also have a doula who was fought on a cliff, and that fight was annoying as hell. But it's just like, if you were to fight Lansseax in like a flat open arena, it would be so much better of a fight, which is basically what Fortissax is. And we come to him next, and he's a much more enjoyable fight. I don't know, maybe it's just the fact that dragons are generally seen in mountain terrains, but I don't know. It'd be nice to just fight them in a flat terrain. Now, focusing on the actual combat portion of the fight, most of Lansseax's attacks are not very hard to dodge, but for each attack that she does, a wave of lightning will come out and create like a secondary hit that can basically roll catch you. None of these attacks are like insta-kills, but if you get hit by two attacks back to back, like if you get hit by the main attack, the lightning attack will hit you because of the stagger, and that will kill you. So it's pretty easy to get quickly killed in this fight if you're not careful. And with the secondary lightning explosions, you can't just like iframe through all of the attacks. You have to actually like dodge out of the way of the attack and make sure that you're not even there for the attack to hit you. Makes it a little bit more difficult, but I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think that's more of just something you need to be aware of and kind of figure out how to deal with. Now, the best way to handle all of these attacks is to just stay near her back legs. Now, in pretty much every Souls game, for almost every single dragon in them, a dragon's biggest weakness is their butt. If you stay underneath the dragon's butt, they can't hit you with any of their attacks. Now, they have ways to like get you out from under there, and they'll generally like move faster than you can move, so you're no longer underneath their butt. But none can hit you directly if you're standing right between the back legs. All of those messages telling you to try finger butthole are just telling you on how to beat dragons. There's actually only one dragon I can think of or dragon boss that I can think of that as actually lures you to finding it at its head. And that is Midir, who I consider to be the best dragon boss. So I think it's more interesting if you're forced into their like head area where all the attacks come out, but most bosses, it's just better to fight them at their tail. Something, and I think a reason why they should want to force you to the head is that all dragons take increased damage to their head, as well as increased poise damage to their head. So if you can manage to hit their head, it's probably more effective to try to hit it. However, especially with Elden Ring, a lot of the dragons are very thin, and their heads are raised pretty far off the ground, above where you can normally reach. You can't most of the time hit the head, and you'll just waste your effort and time trying, and so it's more effective to just kind of swing at the legs instead. Besides, especially with the like lightning dragons that they're adding in, it also puts you in way of the attacks that have a secondary lightning explosion, which means you're gonna get roll caught and punished a lot. Now, the best strategy I found to get under her tail is generally to just stay actually out in front of her, because she won't attack you if you're out of her range. She'll just kind of like walk forward and walk towards you. You can also use this to lure her into a better part of the arena. Uh, but if you stay out in front of her until she's in the right spot, and then you just quickly dash at her to her back legs, she'll just attack out in front of her for a little bit and give you plenty of time to just attack her legs. Out of all of her attacks, there's pretty much only two that are remotely threatening. Those two would be the two-hand slam and the lightning glaive. Both attacks are pretty easily dodged if you just stay underneath her legs. Same with every single other attack. The lightning slam, you basically just need to time it. It can insta-kill, which is the biggest threat of it. However, it's not too hard to time, other than the fact that it's also just out of your sight, so you just kind of have to like intuitively know what it looks like. With the lightning glaive, if you're close enough and you just run straight at her and try to run between her legs, you won't even need to dodge. She'll just swing over your head. However, if you're too far away, as if she like just jumped back and then started doing it, you just jumping on torrent and then running away and then just jumping over the lightning wave is the most effective way to dodge it. So it's just deciding if you're close enough or far enough away is the biggest challenge with that attack. Now, like I've said before, the biggest struggle with this boss is the arena, is the fact that you are fighting her on the side of a mountain, on a cliff. It's basically you on a tightrope on a mountain. So you've got a little narrow band where you actually want to fight her, and everywhere else is like a rocky cliffside where you can't run and you can't roll, and you're just gonna get hit by everything. In the fight, I found that she really likes to jump and walk on the rocks. Like, that dragged out the fight much longer than it should have, of just her just jumping around, jumping onto the rocks, and me just trying to lure her away from the rocks to a place where I can actually attack her safely. Also, since it's in the open world and not in an actual arena, there's other enemies around you. There's lightning rams that like to join in the fight and kind of just headbutt you. There's the knight that's down below that if you aggro him, he'll join in, and that kind of screws you over. Lansseax can technically friendly fire there and take care of it for you, but it doesn't always work. For resistances, Lansseax has only 252 points of resistance to both bleed and frost, so it seems like you would be able to apply both of them pretty quickly. However, because Lansseax moves a lot and hitting her little dragon feet is kind of hard, I find it actually takes quite a long time to stack any sort of debuff on her. It just lasts a long time purely because of the arena. Like, she'll jump away and you'll have to lead her back into the center arena, and it just takes more time to actually stack up debuffs. Like, the best option for applying these debuffs, I'd still think, is the Frost Claws. However, it's still, with all of the movement and the arena you fight her in, it's just an annoying and tedious process. I guess overall, it's not a bad boss. I think the boss is fine. It's just a really terrible arena to fight it in. I technically don't have to fight this boss because it's not a Remembrance. This is an all Remembrances run. However, I kind of want to turn it into an all bosses run, so I would need to fight it eventually. So why not get it out of the way with all of the other dragon bosses? Oh my fucking god. That boss is annoying. Like, the boss itself is not annoying. Like, I think the moveset of Lansseax is really cool. It's just fighting a dragon on a cliffside is really annoying. Like, I think like most of my struggles in that boss fight is mostly just keeping Lansseax in this like middle area here where there's flat ground instead of her either deciding to go on the ledges where there's a bunch of rocks where I can't just like walk over and I'll get stuck and get hit, or honestly most of the time she would just like jump over here, jump into the rocks, and either get near these knights here who would aggro on me and then now I'd have two enemies to be fighting, or just get myself caught on the rocks. Took way too many attempts for how simple the boss is. It's just annoying to fight. At least I'm pretty sure Lansseax and Fortissax have pretty similar movesets, and at least Lansseax or Fortissax is fought in an actual arena that we're fighting next. So hopefully his fight will be better. But yeah, now we get to fight another dragon boss in a better environment. So hopefully that'll actually be interesting. Right, after Lansseax was Fortissax. If I remember correctly, these bosses have quite similar movesets. Um, it kind of makes sense, but I don't think it should be too drastically different. I know there's a lot more lightning in this fight, so that's something I have to deal with. I'm gonna have to go through this entire like animation sequence every time I want to fight them. They're kind of annoying. Oh. Okay, so not an insta kill. Good. Alright. Able to just run out of that. There's also this lightning that just always spawns around you. Not entirely sure exactly what causes it. I'm assuming it's just standing near him. It just happens every so often. So that's just something you have to deal with. And you're able to just walk out of it, so you don't even need to like dodge it. Just make sure you're moving when it happens. And the lightning rain that he does actually... Oh shit. Well, that was close. The lightning rain seems to be only around him and not actually on top of him, so you can just keep hitting him while that happens. Okay, not an insta-kill. That's nice. Taking a few unnecessary hits here. But yeah, like this, you can just sit around him and keep whacking him. Obviously, making sure to dodge the actual lightning strikes that happen. Okay. Kind of dangerous there. Yeah, most of his moveset's quite similar to Lansseax, so it's not like it's too much of a stretch to try to fight him. Let's see. Oh, that one was weird. It actually still hit me even though I was moving. Maybe it's a good idea to just run and dodge if you can. not just like try to guarantee it, just walking through. It does give you a warning though, it like lights up a little bit brighter where it's about to hit, so you can like react to it. I'm uncertain about this. Okay, that's nice. Seems to move really far forward on that, so makes it easier to dodge. Well, that's scary. With the fact that he has lightning, a lot of times he can almost double tap you. Oh, that's... I'm not running away for that. Ah, goddamn. Try to get a hit in there, but the both lightning striked at different times, so I had to get hit by one of them and got hit by both. It was pretty close for a first attempt. I mean, he's pretty similar to Lansseax. Now we have Fortissax. This boss, in its entirety, is very, very similar to Lansseax, as I've said this many times. So most of the tactics that worked for Lansseax pretty much work for Fortissax. Same main strat of just attacking the back legs and then, you know, staying out in front to bait attacks so you get more opportunity to smack at his legs. Most of his attacks are almost the exact same as Lansseax. However, this does still feel like a much better version of the boss fight, as I guess the arena makes all of the difference. Now, Fortissax does have double the status effect resistance as Lansseax. Instead of the 252, he has like 552. So it takes a little bit more, it takes a few more hits to build up any sort of status effect. However, you do get a lot more opportunity to hit him, so it actually took less time to fight Fortissax than it took to fight Lansseax. Now, there are a few big differences between the two dragons. The first one is the glaive attack that both of them have. Lansseax just jumps back and then swings it down to the ground, whereas Fortissax jumps up into the air, flies for a bit, and then comes down in like a spiral disc pattern or whatever. This is a very easy attack to dodge. All you gotta do is just run at him and to the left. You don't even need to dodge if you start doing this, because he takes a very large forward step when he does this, and it'll just go right over your head. The Deathlight Lightning that he has is much easier to dodge than Lansseax, as instead of striking in a circle around Lansseax where the entire area can be hit, even underneath the dragon, Fortissax creates it as like a ring around him, so it doesn't hit on the dragon, which means that you can just stay under his feet, smacking him the entire time, and at that point you don't even longer have to worry about getting hit by anything else because he's not attacking when he's roaring. The last main difference is the personal lightning strikes that that go off every so often. These have a 3-second delay before striking, so as soon as you see the lightning cover your body, it takes 3 seconds for it to actually hit. It's very predictable. It actually is able to be dodged by just moving out of the way. Even just walking in a straight line is able to dodge them. So it's not too hard to dodge these, it's just you gotta be conscious when you're like attacking. However, I would say it's still recommended to like be running or dodge out of the way just for like a margin of error so that you don't actually get hit by them, because sometimes I found if you're just walking away you might take like a slightly curved path and that'll get you hit. Just take extra caution when dealing with it. The main challenge of this fight, I guess, is mostly just coming from the amount of things that Fortissax asks for you to take care of at a single time. So like making sure that you're positioning around the boss correctly so that you can, you know, get a lot of hits in while not getting hit yourself. Making sure that every attack that you dodge out of the way of instead of just trying to iframe it because of all the secondary lightning strikes that come afterwards. The personal lightning strikes that come out pretty often, making sure you don't just stand still for that. As well as the possible buildup of Death Blight if you get inside of those clouds. The hardest part of all this is probably just the actual personal lightning strikes. However, they're really consistent in their timing. It's 3 seconds every single time. They can be evaded really easily by just moving. But I do think it is a very needed addition to this fight. I feel like even though it's such a small change, it adds so much depth to the fight that it makes it just so much more enjoyable. I guess that is that layer of, the challenge of the boss is trying to take in everything at once. But it does feel like it makes it much more of a challenge to take on, but it makes it much more enjoyable. Overall, this boss is a much better boss than Lansseax, even though they are nearly identical. Arena makes all of the difference. I cannot state this enough. A boss can be completely screwed over because of its arena design. If it is not just a flat, open terrain, it can, like, the boss itself can be enjoyable, but if the arena does not work with the boss, it's generally just a nightmare to try to fight him. And there's many bosses that show this example in the game, where really bad bosses combined with good arenas can lead to good fights, and good bosses put in bad arenas can lead to some of the worst fights. The arena, even though it's not the boss itself, the arena makes up just so much of what a boss fight. It makes up so much of what makes a boss fight enjoyable. But I will say this fight is very enjoyable. It has a lot of good stuff about it, and it basically is the same fight as Lansseax, but it decided to fix every single complaint I had about it. There we go. Lich Dragon Fortissax. Honestly, very fun fight. It's a lot to take in. Most of the problems with that fight and the challenge with it is just the amount of things that you have to be aware of at a single time. Because you have to be focusing on the boss, like where he is, where you want to be. You have to also be focusing on where his like secondary strikes are, because after every strike will be a wave of lightning. You want to make sure you don't dodge into that. And you have to be focusing on the constant like personal lightning strikes that happen every so often. and making sure that you're constantly moving and being aware of what that is. I mean, it's a fun fight. Like, I really enjoy that fight. Um, Surprisingly, not very hard. Um, like, it's very similar to Lansseax. Like, I have no problems with Lansseax's actual movement. I think it's really cool. It's just the arena you fight Lansseax in is garbage. This is an open terrain, flat, open, lovely fight. Like, this is really, really fun. Not too hard, although I'm surprised it's actually not that hard, considering how seemingly late you get it. Though you fight it, because this would technically bring you right into Lyondell with this teleporter right here. So, I don't know. Still, really fun fight, not too bad. But now we have the final of the Dragon Trio left, which is Placidusax. Uh, this one might be a little bit harder, as he seems to have a lot more about him, but we'll see about that in a little bit. Ah, yes. And then there's D, who believes he killed a person who was already dead. Good job. Now it's time for Placidusax. It's the final of the Dragon Trio bosses. Alright, here we go. First attempt. Now, Black Flame Blade has a very short time that's active, so you kind of want to activate it right before you're going to use it. Just ran through. Yeah, that was pretty effective. I don't know why I did that. And that just insta-killed me. Alright. Great. Kind of a very scuffed first run. And the run back is not the greatest. And here we have Placidusax, the final boss of the Dragon Trio. This fight actually used a much different strategy than all of my other fights up to this point. Um, Placidusax is very, very resistant to all of the status effects. It takes forever to apply anything to him. So, trying to use like the Frost Claws or use any sort of status effect pots doesn't really work on this fight. You'll stay in the fight for around like 20 minutes if you try to apply status effects to kill. However, there is another way to deal percentage-based damage to bosses, and that is using the Black Flame Blade incantation. This incant applies a 7-second buff to the weapon that applies Black Flame on hit. This debuff is a 2-second long damage over time spell that does 20 damage, and an additional 20 damage for every 1000 max HP that the boss has. Meaning that this will do a minimum of 1% of the boss's max HP every second that the debuff is active. This debuff, however, doesn't stack, so every time you hit, it doesn't do more percentage, it just resets the timer. The more you hit it, the longer the debuff lasts. This spell, however, does require 17 Faith to cast, so you can't just cast this with Soul Level 1 account. You have to start using heirlooms and armors to be able to actually reach that 17 Faith. I used the combination of the Two Fingers Heirloom, which increases your Faith by 5, and the Halic Tree Knight Helmet, which increases your Faith by 2. There's other combinations of items that can get you to 17 Faith. You can also use Marika's Scar Seal. That increases Faith by 5. However, you're already wearing Radagon Scar Seal, and both of them increase the damage you take, which, if you're wearing both of them, pretty much any attack at that point is an insta-kill. So, didn't really want to use that, so I don't just get insta-kill by attacks. There's also some other helmets that increase it by 1 or 2. There's a garb that increases your Faith by 1, but I found that the Halic Tree Helmet plus Two Fingers Heirloom is probably just the easiest and most effective way to get that plus 7 Faith. It doesn't really matter what weapon you use to apply this debuff, as it's not really reliant on the actual weapon's damage, but rather the boss's HP. So, just a recommendation of any sort of fast, swinging, long-ranged weapon that doesn't really use too much stamina is probably your best option. There are 2 weapons that I found that worked pretty well, which was the Broadsword and the Rapier. The one that I favored was more of the Broadsword, as it felt like it had a pretty quick swing. You could apply the debuff consistently, and its range was decent. It's not the greatest, but range was not necessarily a problem in this fight. It also has a swipe, a swing, so it was much easier to connect with that. Whereas the Rapier had a poke, which I felt just a little bit more inconsistent to actually connect with the boss. The Rapier had good range, more than the Broadsword, and it attacks very quickly and doesn't consume too much stamina, but I preferred consistency of hitting, just needing to be a little bit closer than the, faster swings, which doesn't really matter because just every hit just resets the timer to 2 seconds instead of adding more, so it doesn't matter how fast you hit as long as you can hit every 2 seconds. Now, the use of the Black Flame Blade is a very effective spell in a Soul Level 1 run, and it's probably going to be used for a lot of other boss fights in the future. Every boss from now on has really, really high resistances to all status effects. Horalu has really high resistances to both Bleed and Frost, Radagon is immune to Bleed, and the Elden Beast is immune to all status effects, so you can't even use Frost and Bleed to beat the Elden Beast. So this is basically one of the only things that'll actually work from this point on. You can combine it with the claws, as long as you don't have it with the Frost Ash of War, just have it as a standard claw. You can buff that with it, so you can apply both Bleed and Black Flame at the same time, but it has a pretty short range, so it's a little bit inconsistent to actually land attacks with that. Now, looking at Placidusax attacks, most of them are quite easy to dodge. He doesn't really have much movement, so it's really easy to just get behind him and get to his tail and just basically wail on it. Most of the time you're just watching for the Fire Breath attacks that he has, because they're the only really attacks that he has that can hit behind him. But they're pretty easy to dodge, as all you gotta do is just run backwards behind his tail. He can't really hit behind the tip of his tail, so that's generally a safe spot. And then once he's done doing a Fire Breath attack, it generally leaves him open for a lot of hits. So most of the time I also found that running to his right side is the most effective way to go. A lot of his attacks don't reach his right side, or are just easily dodged if you're on his right side. Running to his right, sticking to a tail is the best place to be. Now, the hardest attacks that I found that he has to dodge are his Thundercloud dives, the teleport attacks, and his final laser attack. The flying dives are pretty easily avoided by just running straight at him and then just dodging at the last second. And then if he's doing a circling pattern and not just flying straight at you, run to the left, or slightly to the left, because he always circles counterclockwise. Because whenever he does these attacks and lands, he'll create an explosion around where he hits, which is slightly delayed from his actual swipe, which can catch you and instantly kill you. So if you just run straight at him, you'll completely avoid ever being hit by that. Now, his teleporting attacks are generally just best dodged by running away. Just don't even try to attack when he's doing these because you're probably just going to get hit. You can always tell the direction of where he's going to be coming from by the sound. He'll always make a sound even if you can't see him, like if he's behind you or something like that. You can always hear where he's going to be attacking from. So just listening to where he's coming from is really effective in this fight. And then his laser attack, or his Placidusax Rune. This will always occur when he reaches about 20% of his HP. I don't know the exact amount, but it feels around 20%. This attack is always foreshadowed by a Lightning War, where he'll then go into a Thundercloud charge. This lightning will be different than all the other ones, as it'll only strike twice instead of 3 times. And then he will vanish, go into the Thundercloud attack, and then dive down at you. For this attack, once you dodge that Thundercloud dive, you want to immediately turn around and just start running at him. You kind of want to go up and hug his right side, as the lasers don't hit there, and you can just continue attacking while he's continuing the lasers. Now, you likely will need to dodge at least like one laser when you're running up, as he does it pretty quickly, but it's easier to dodge one attack than it is to dodge the entire set. Overall, I found this was a pretty fun fight. Not like the best, but it was still really cool. I do feel like it would be a little bit better if he had more movement. He stands still a lot in this fight, and a lot of the fight is kind of just wailing on his tail and just watching for his fire breath attacks. I know he's supposed to be like an older dragon, so he's kind of like weakened and stuff, but he still feels kind of slow. Like when you stay around his tail, you kind of just don't have to dodge any of his heart attacks. You're kind of already out of the way of him. And because of that, most of his attacks really don't feel threatening, other than just the raw damage, because they hurt a lot. I feel like he's a pretty easy boss, other than the fact that he does a lot of damage. Visually, he's very, very impressive. I see there's a lot of inspiration from Midir, especially with his laser attack. That is almost a direct rip from Midir, although it is, I feel, harder to dodge than Midir's lasers. It's still, I think it's a good callback. I will say that I enjoyed the fight, even with all this. It is a really cool fight. I just feel like it could be a little bit faster paced, so that his attacks feel like they have a little bit more threatening aura to them. It just feels like his boss fight should have a little bit more weight to it. Alright, there we fucking go. Honestly, a really, really cool dragon boss. Yet, I still don't think it tops Midir. There's something more about that Midir's boss fight, but Placidusax is great. Absolute spectacle to fight, which is always a good thing for bosses, is when it just feels good to watch the fight occur. Um, there's some weird attacks that he has. A lot of them have like a main hit with his claw and then an after hit explosion that's means you kind of just have to be dodging out of the way of the attack entirely instead of just trying to iframe it. But not too bad of a fight. It's pretty fun, actually. But that's the end of the Dragon Trio boss. Alright, well, I think that's all I have time for. We were able to get through quite a lot. We were able to knock out 4 Remembrance bosses and do a little bit of cleanup with some other extra side bosses and stuff like that. Get through the Ancestor spirits, through Mohg, through the Dragon Trio. Um, but I think that just leaves us with a few extra minor bosses. I know there's a lot of small side bosses and like a bunch of caves and stuff that I have yet to do, but I'll save those for later. Just aim for more larger, bigger bosses. But in terms of Remembrance bosses, I think the only ones we have left is Horaloo, Melania, and the Elden Beast. Down to the final 3 Remembrance bosses. So I think that's all I will have time for, and I will see you next time.